Abstract financial capital is the real subject that dominates the production relations of the Western bourgeoisie. The accumulation of financial capital prepares the potential objective conditions for socialism, and also creates the subjective class conditions for socialism to overthrow financial capitalism. The domination of the empire of finance capital tried to prevent the combination of subjective and objective conditions of socialism, but made the inevitability of this combination more obvious by creating a deeper crisis. Under the rule of the financial capital empire, the parasitic accumulation of financial capital is increasingly strengthened, social contradictions are deepening, and right-wing populism is rising. Under the impact of right-wing populism, the legitimacy of neoliberalism is gradually losing, the road of reformism of the middle class is becoming increasingly narrow, and the popular movement breaks away from populism and integrates with democracy, and the democratic movement is increasingly seeking to integrate with Marxism. Combine again. The transformation of liberalism to right-wing populism and the transformation of right-wing populism to socialism under the domination of the financial capital empire are inevitable. Keywords: West, financial capital empire, populist trend, socialist movement. CLC number D630 document identification code A. DOI 10.16619/J.Key.RMLTXSQY.2022.02.008. Industrial capital, commercial capital, and bank capital seek, interpenetrate, and integrate with each other on the basis of their respective concentrations, producing large currency monopoly capital, that is, financial capital. Financial capital dominates industry, commerce, banks, real estate, national debt, and currency issuance. It is a veritable subject that dominates capitalist production relations and is the real leviathan in capitalist society. The accumulation of financial capital has three logics. First, productive accumulation, that is, financial capital is accumulated by means of revolutions in the social production process, revolutions in production, circulation, and credit. Second, parasitic accumulation, that is, the accumulation of financial capital through patent rights, pricing power, financial speculation, real estate rent-seeking, and theft of the treasury. Third, the shift from productive accumulation to parasitic accumulation, that is, with the development of financial capital, parasitic accumulation of financial capital increasingly replaces productive accumulation and becomes the dominant accumulation method. The productive accumulation of financial capital creates objective conditions for socialism, and the parasitic accumulation of financial capital creates subjective class conditions for socialism that resist financial capital. The empire of financial capital tries to prevent the combination of subjective and objective conditions for socialism, but under the rule of the financial capital empire, the increasing deviation of financial capital from productive accumulation to parasitic accumulation has led to the populization of the financial capital empire, resulting in a crisis of legitimacy for liberal ideology. The middle road is unsustainable, and social democracy the movement became more and more active, and the combination of social democratic movement and Marxism became more and more urgent. The populization of the financial capital empire makes the necessity and inevitability of combining the subjective and objective conditions of socialism more obvious. Financial capital accumulation creates objective conditions for socialism. Financial capital has promoted the technological revolution, the socialization of the industrial system, the union of the social producer class, and the separation of economic management functions from capital ownership. The capital allocation of financial capital also includes more and more specific functions of regulating social reproduction and economic planning functions, all of which prepare the objective conditions for socialized mass production for the future of socialism. First, the technological revolution. Financial capital needs to achieve excess profits through technological revolution and technological monopoly, and then capitalize the excess profits in the securities market, and collect money through securities and stocks. Therefore, financial capital cares about technological progress and technological innovation. Under the domination of financial capital, the Industrial Revolution continues to advance, especially the information technology revolution in the third and fourth waves of technological revolution, which has had a great impact on social production methods and lifestyles. Capitalist production was initially established on the basis of manufactory, which developed division of labor. Division of labor developed specialized tools, and the combination of tools produced machine tools, which are the symbol of the Industrial Revolution. The machine tool driven by the power mechanism and transmission mechanism becomes a machine, and the machine is combined into a machine system, thus realizing a great breakthrough in the Industrial Revolution in human history. The machine system is already a relatively automated production system, with people watching from the sidelines, and the machine system itself is automatic, but the automation is not so perfect and thorough. The development of information technology has greatly promoted the automation of production. Big data, cloud computing, and intelligence integration have transformed the traditional manufacturing industry, created new industrial sectors, and improved the intelligence level of the social production system. Factories are getting closer and closer to unmanned factories. The automated production system can work continuously and accurately for a long time, and can overcome various natural limitations of the human body. Human beings' own mental work is more and more concentrated in the field of creativity. At the end of the 19th century, about half of the US population was engaged in agriculture. Today, this proportion has dropped to less than 2%. Productivity has increased, the content of production has been enriched, and human activities have gradually concentrated in the direction of free and conscious creative activities. All these have provided productive forces for the liberation of labor and the free and comprehensive development of human beings. Second, the socialization of industry. The spirit and purpose of financial capital run through its dominance over various fields of social reproduction, and financial capital is the organizational subject of the industrial system. Capital promotes the development of productive forces, creates a second nature on the basis of the first nature, and constantly improves the material organs of human practice spirit. In order to find new investment places for excess capital, financial capital constantly opens up new fields, explores new attributes of nature, creates new industries, transforms old industries, promotes international investment, promotes international division of labor, and creates more and more abundant and developed industries. The division of labor system creates a socialized industrial system that is increasingly interconnected. Informatization, automation, has transformed traditional agriculture and manufacturing. The structure is constantly adjusted and upgraded, and the degree of social organization of production is getting higher and higher. Large enterprises that are becoming more and more intelligent organized production. Through the Internet of Things, and cloud computing, they collect, organize, and analyze detailed information on production, circulation, exchange, and consumption around the clock, and organize and deploy various produce resources, carry out planned production, and use the developed intelligent logistics system for rapid distribution to quickly meet the diverse and personalized needs of consumers. Large multinational corporations and their subsidiaries have organized producers. This kind of organization not only makes use of plans and markets, but also makes use of competition among producers and competition among low and small and medium-sized enterprises. The connection with large enterprises does not prevent small and medium-sized enterprises from competing with each other. The purpose of their competition is to obtain the favor and order from large enterprises. Under the domination of large monopoly enterprises, small production enterprises are no longer isolated small production enterprises, but small enterprises that are producers of certain parts of multinational corporations. Although small enterprises are still independently accounted for, they are formally free enterprises. However, in essence, there are already various predefined business relationships, financial relationships, and credit relationships, as well as predefined business scope, price levels, and profit margins. The free competitive market described by Smith is not quite the same. The profits of these small enterprises can be controlled by financial capital, and this kind of internal link relationship and incomplete market relationship between industries is embedded in the social production system organized by financial capital as the main body. Thirdly, the association of the productive classes of society. With the development of the socialization of production led by financial capital, the association of social producers and laborers has become more and more extensive. Everyone has become an atom in the capitalist production system. The social production system is used as a medium to communicate with each other to obtain their own living conditions. The industrial workers of large monopoly enterprises are the main body of the social producer class. Information technology facilitates free and flexible working methods and makes home office possible. The separation of production and consumption sites is changed. Knowledge workers eliminate the one-sided old-fashioned division of labor, and it becomes possible to eliminate situations that force individuals to slavishly obey the division of labor. People participate in productive labor freely, autonomously, and consciously, and give full play to their talents. Small business owners, small craftsmen, and small businessmen are also important forces in the social producer class. Finance capital is constantly destroying small producers, and new ones are constantly being created. Under the monopoly of financial capital, the profits of small and medium-sized enterprises in formally free competition are compressed to a level equivalent to the wages of senior workers or senior managers, and they also become part of socially united labor in a certain sense. Driven by the internet, the resistance and struggle of the global working class and other labor groups have changed from freedom to self-action, making them more closely united and united. Fourth, the separation of managers and owners. It is a general characteristic of capitalism that the appropriation of capital is separated from its employment in production, that money capital is separated from industrial or productive capital, that the rentier, who lives entirely on the income of money capital, is separated from the entrepreneur, and all people who directly participate in the use of capital are separated. 1. The socialization of production accelerates the separation of management rights and ownership. The bourgeoisie elects a class of agents from the proletariat, giving them higher wages and social status. Marx said that the more capable a ruling class is in absorbing all kinds of outstanding elements in society and organizing them to serve itself, the more stable and dangerous its rule. Financial capital has monopolized and organized more and more business sectors, forming a huge managerial class to serve it. The financial bourgeoisie runs universities and trains many professional technicians, engineers, scientists, and managers to serve financiers. If there is a social change in the United States one day, after the ownership transformation of the financial oligarchy, many functions and personnel of the managerial class can be directly retained to serve the construction of the new society. Of course, the managerial class is also hierarchical. The closer the managerial class is to the center of financial capital, the more active spokespersons and part of financial capital it is. Fifth, the centralization of economic planning functions. Finance capital has increasingly concentrated the domination of social production in the hands of a small number of joint institutions of financial oligarchy. The investment bank of finance capital is as much a center of speculation as it is of planning. Financial capital does not just make quick money in the stock market, it also plans, selects, or cultivates investment fields, considers development prospects, masters various departments in the entire industrial system, and guides investment. The investment bank is the planning center of the capitalist economy. It grasps the development status of various industries, which are sunrise industries and which are sunset industries, how to allocate capital, how to invest, where the most profitable, where the risk is greatest, and how to incubate excess capital. Which emerging industries, where the means of production and resources are, where the resource endowment and labor endowment are good, etc. These information are all controlled in the core center of financial institutions. In order to maximize profits, financial institutions implement mergers and acquisitions by means of planning to promote the integration of monopoly organizations so that they can reduce internal friction and serve financial capital better. Only by completing these plans can financial capital ensure its own monopoly position and earn excess profits, monopoly profits, and entrepreneurial profits. Financial capital is the subject, and its nervous system and various necessary organs will gradually grow up and dominate the capitalist production relations in the capitalist production relations, thus becoming the planning center of the capitalist production relations. The plans of financial institutions are directly subordinated to the interests of the financial oligarchy, and to the public interest. Bankers wear multiple hats, and they monopolize the highest functions of economic life. Financial capital accumulation creates subjective class conditions for socialism. Financial capital has led capitalism to organized capitalism, but under the control of financial capital's real interests. The social nature of production is only a means to strengthen the parasitic accumulation of financial capital. The parasitic accumulation of financial capital has caused the decline of the middle class, the exclusion and marginalization of the working class, and the deep abyss of unemployment, poverty, and debt slavery. The accumulation of finance capital created increasingly angry and disaffected crowds, thereby preparing the class conditions for the socialist movement. First, the parasitic accumulation of financial capital. Financial capital turns technological progress, the monopoly of business organizations, the monopoly of real estate and resources, the financialization of daily life, and the domination of public credit and the public sector into means of parasitic accumulation. Financial capital uses patent rights, licensing rights, and intellectual property rights to collect tributes from manufacturers and consumers through OEM. Financial capital takes advantage of the monopoly of operating organizations to exploit both producers and customers through pricing power. Financial capital takes advantage of its common intermediary status in economic life and uses various financial innovations to lead modern capitalism to the gambling economy through company packaging, stock issuance, securities speculation, usury and various frauds. The stock market, futures, financial derivatives such as exchange rates and bulk commodities have become bets and gambling funds in the financial big casino. As Marx pointed out, the system of credit develops the motive force of capitalist production, the enrichment of wealth by exploiting the labor of others, into the purest and most gigantic system of gambling and fraud, and makes the minority who exploit the wealth of society more and more numerous, decreasing too. The parasitic accumulation of financial capital is also manifested in the monopoly privileges of oil and mines, the rent-seeking accumulation based on real estate, and the capitalization and securitization of real estate. The parasitic accumulation of financial capital permeates all aspects of production relations, and financial oligarchs are pirates parasitic in modern society, a group of bandits who plunder agricultural and industrial production and enslave the entire society in all aspects. 3. Second, the shrinking of the industry. Financial capital deprives wage earners, small and medium investors, and producers, increasing manufacturing costs and limiting the scale of demand, which in turn leads to overproduction, overcapacity, and industry shrinkage. Financial capital casts a tight net over civil society, which becomes tighter and tighter. The parasitic accumulation of financial capital leads to the expansion of the parasitic class, and the number of parasites is increasing. The service industry subordinate to the profligate consumption of financial oligarchy continues to expand, producing so-called service industries such as golf courses, racetracks, and casinos, which makes the employment of a considerable number of workers dependent on the luxury consumption of financial aristocrats. The expansion of the parasitic accumulation of financial capital leads to an increase in the cost of manufacturing. The cost of power grids in the US is 21 times that of China, that of subways is 22 times, and that of bridges is 38 times. The number of workers directly engaged in production is dwindling compared to the new service class. Technological innovation promoted by financial capital accelerates the replacement of workers and causes greater unemployment. Large capitals deprive small and medium capitals, and small and medium capitals intensify the deprivation of laborers. Average U.S. household income has stagnated since 1988, and in 2010 93% of U.S. national income went to the wealthiest 1% of the U.S. population, according to data provided by economist Emmanuel Said. Hands. The deprivation and parasitic accumulation of financial capital lead to expensive education, medical care, housing, pension, insurance, and other expenses. The gap between the rich and the poor continues to widen, and a considerable proportion of the social productive class falls back into relative poverty or even absolute poverty. Financial capital imposes tribute on small and medium-sized industrial capital, which weakens the accumulation capacity of small and medium-sized industrial capital. Small and medium-sized industrial capital strengthens the exploitation of laborers, which in turn reduces the scale of total social demand, leading to the shrinking of industries. 100 years ago, the industrial output value of the United States accounted for almost half of the world. Now the industrial output value of the United States is only half of that of China. Third, the intensification of the debt burden. Financial capital tries to stimulate consumption with credit expansion and solve problems such as overproduction and insufficient effective demand. The scale of demand is always insufficient for the proliferation capacity of capital. Excess capital and excess capacity are the normal state of capitalism. Financial capital has money, but its products cannot be sold only to itself, so financial capital lends money to consumers, that is, uses credit consumption to solve capitalism's problems of insufficient effective demand and overcapacity. For financiers, credit has multiple benefits. First, they sell products and realize profits. Second, they earn interest. Credit is expressed as a direct trust. However, credit is associated with debt, and they are two sides of the same coin. Credit expansion creates widespread debt relationships. In the United States, small and medium-sized enterprises, college students, and ordinary residents all rely on the credit provided by financial capital. The stronger the ability of financial capital to provide credit, the more it will push the debt relationship to a new height. Financial capital stimulates current consumption based on the future income of the working class through the credit economy, but the result is a widespread debt relationship, and a new society of debt slavery is formed under the form of equality of contract freedom and legal freedom. The credit system and debt system have mortgaged the income of the working class for decades to come to financial capital. The wage earners transform their future income into the cash flow of financial capital in the form of interest payments and mortgage repayments. Fourth, a mutually reinforcing crisis of shrinking industries and debt burdens, a debt deflation crisis that keeps the working class dispossessed. On the one hand, financial capital has caused the shrinkage of reproduction, and on the other hand, it has caused the expansion of debt. The shrinkage of social production and the expansion of debt reinforce each other, leading to the inherent debt deflation crisis of financial capitalism. In a certain stage, credit expansion can promote the expansion of social reproduction and stimulate further growth of credit, while the growth of credit and the development of debt economy can stimulate the expansion of social reproduction. This can be seen as a process of positive feedback between social reproduction and debt economy. In this positive feedback process, the deprivation of society by financial capital is not so obvious. The normal operation of the credit system depends on the debt capacity of the wage earners, on the normal progress of social reproduction, on the smooth development of industries, and on the income stability of the wage earners. However, when the debt accumulates to a certain scale and reaches a certain critical point, it will be difficult to repay the debt on schedule, leading to a credit crisis. The credit crisis will in turn lead to a shrinking of production, and the shrinking of production will make it even more difficult to repay the debt. That is to say, at a certain critical point, the shrinkage of social reproduction and the increase of debt reinforce each other, just like the society suffers from two diseases, and the treatment of one disease will exacerbate the other disease. The two diseases reinforce each other, and finally, the system collapses. This is the logic of the collapse of financial capital. Fifth, the resistance of the producer class to the production relations of financial capitalism. Financial capital will inevitably move from productive accumulation to parasitic accumulation, which will inevitably lead to the expansion of the number of parasitic classes, the increase of manufacturing costs, the hollowing out of industries, the re-impoverishment of the producer class, and the social hierarchy. These are not transferred by individual will. The progress of science and technology, financial capital has also become a tool to accelerate the unemployment of workers and the deprivation of wage earners. The working class has been deprived of financial capital time and time again in civil society, and the society dominated by the middle class has become a pyramid structure, with more and more people at the bottom. In a bourgeois country, the middle income class will inevitably experience greater class differentiation each time as the parasitic accumulation of financial capital continues to strengthen. A large number of the middle income class have been in the ranks of absolute poverty. The potential elements of socialism such as large-scale production, technological development, and socialization of labor have all caused profound crises and social problems in the hands of financial capital. The social producer class unites to gain control over democratic politics, to take the means of production monopolized by financial capital into social ownership, to abolish the oligarchy of financial capital, to expropriate the expropriators, to expropriate the parasites, and to free society from the exploitation of financial capital. Rescued from under the rule of government, taking back the activities of financial capital from private hands, and putting them back under the supervision of social public power. Only by liberating these potential elements of socialism from the confinement of financial oligarchy ownership, and under the joint ownership these factors can become the basis of socialism. The domination of the empire of finance capital seeks to prevent the combination of subjective and objective conditions of socialism. From the perspective of financial capital, the state is divided into the internal state as a tool of financial capital and the external state as a public power. Finance capital has established internal state machinery subordinate to finance capital itself, namely the central bank system, fiscal system, military machinery, etc. The internal state of financial capital continuously deprives public power, trying to split the subjective and objective conditions of socialism, but finally makes the necessity and inevitability of the combination of the two more obvious. First, the weakening of public power by financial capital. Financial capital advocates the principle of a big society, a small government, and limits to the sovereignty of the people. Financial capital is afraid of the transformation of public will into general will, and does not like people to gather on the basis of democracy, but advocates that everyone compromise with each other on the basis of the original contract, and everyone tolerates each other to reach a contract. The country advocated by financial capital is the smallest country above the bottom line consensus. Such a country only has the powers that everyone can adjudicate, such as protecting life safety, combating criminal crimes, and managing public disasters, etc. The content that everyone agrees with can rise to the national will. The state protects only those rights that each person has as a rational being. If some people disagree, such as progressive taxation, it is not naturally legal in the eyes of financial oligarchs. Financial capital does not like the minority obeying the majority. Financial capital believes that the minority obeying the majority is a breach of contract, which will lead to the coercion of the majority over the minority, resulting in the so-called tyranny of the majority. Liberalism prefers republic to democracy, Locke to Rousseau. Tocqueville said that if a democratic system is implemented, it will definitely lead to the legal deprivation of the minority by the majority, and this minority refers to the oligarchy. Financial capital prevents most people from organizing. The democratic politics designed by financial capital only provides everyone with the right to vote in isolation every 4 years, so Rousseau once criticized the British electoral system, thinking that the British people's right to vote only means that the people are free at the moment of voting. After that moment, he became a slave again. The institutional design of finance capital is inherently anti-democratic. The separation of legislative, administrative, and judicial powers is not a system of separation of powers under the unity of sovereignty, but a division of sovereignty itself, which weakens sovereignty. In fact, it also weakens democratic politics, democratic political supervision and constraints on financial capital. Ability. What financial capital advocates is not democracy, but a republic, that is, to protect all people equally as abstract rational persons. In this way, the financial oligarchy obtains the same human rights as all people. On the basis of this political philosophy, the power of financial capital is protected as the personal human rights of the financial oligarchy. Second, the internal state of finance capital. In Western countries, the central bank appears to be part of the public power, but in essence it is a private bank, a private central bank. Marx once sharply analyzed how the Bank of England, as a private central bank, abused the country's public credit transfer and stole social wealth. Before Marx, Owen also pointed out the private nature of the Bank of England. Thus the Bank of England's note became the legal standard of value in England. But it was soon seen that the introduction of this new artificial standard created great dangers. For the prosperity and happiness of the community were thereby let a commercial company handle it at will. For the financial bourgeoisie also manipulates the House of Representatives through donations, funding and bribery, and installs agents in government agencies. Various interest groups, lobby groups, associations, think tank groups, etc. influence and dominate the country. Through these various interest groups, agents, and shadow governments, the will of the financial oligarchy has risen to the will of the state. For example, relevant organizations such as the Japan Economic Revitalization Headquarters, Economic and Fiscal Advisory Council, and Organizational Reform Conference all represent the interests of the Japanese financial circles and large enterprises. The police, judiciary, and army are all public powers in form, but in fact they are all manipulated by financial capital behind them. The executors of key branches of government power also came from the financial aristocracy. Wall Street dominates the U.S. Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and the government, and public power becomes the debt slave of financial capital. Under the domination of the internal state of financial capital, public power is only a superficial illusion, and the formal public power has become a puppet that the internal state of financial capital can manipulate at will. Third, the new dispossession of society by the state within finance capital in the name of public power. State power is used to promote the deprivational accumulation of financial capital and safeguard the interests of large enterprises, chaebols, and capitalists. In the United States, financial capital got out of the crisis in the form of public power liabilities, that is, excessive issuance of dollars. Financial capital charges the proceeds to its own account and the burden to the account of public power. Through the system of national debt, finance capital firmly dominates the country. Finance capital becomes the creditor of the state. In the capitalist world, almost all countries are getting poorer and their sovereign debts are increasing dramatically. The United States is currently the world's largest debtor country. Financial capital implements the quantitative easing policy to get rid of the financial crisis by printing money. Few financial institutions go bankrupt, while the deprivation of the working class and laborers continues. After the 2008 financial crisis, the Federal Reserve has been releasing water continuously to avoid a complete breakdown of cash flow, and transferred the crisis to other links, making the crisis more directly manifested as deprivation of the working class, and saving financial institutions by depriving civil society. After rounds of quantitative easing policies, the vast majority of currencies eventually entered the accounts of a very small number of people. The country as a public power is getting poorer and weaker, and has to cut social welfare to satisfy the greed of financial oligarchs. Fourth, the imperialist nature of the tyranny of financial capital. The center of the financial capital empire is Wall Street in the United States, and its power radiates around the world. The American financial capital empire is known as the New Roman Empire, and several oceans are its inner lakes. The core area of the financial capital empire has not been fully unified. The United States, Japan, and Europe are equivalent to several aristocratic republican federations within the financial empire. There are agents and vassal states of finance capital empires everywhere in Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, and Eastern Europe. Finance capital empires are divided into colonial empires and neo-imperialism. The new imperialism of financial capital was established after the collapse of colonialism, and the national liberation movement was only a formal political liberation. The land aristocracy and financial aristocracy in most areas continued to dominate the local economy and politics. This phenomenon can be seen in Latin America and the Middle East, and there are few places in the world that have truly completed bourgeois democratic revolutions. The empires of finance capital, backed by vassal states, dominate globalization. The financial capital empire disintegrates the social democratic movement with liberalism, prevents the social democratic movement from grasping public power, prevents public power from performing the function of transforming the economic base, leads contradictions to the outside, and disintegrates the class consciousness of the working class ideologically and ideologically. The empire of finance capital pits white-collar workers against blue-collar workers and divides the international working class. Fifth, the empire of finance capital tried but failed to prevent the combination of subjective and objective conditions of socialism. The accumulation of financial capital leads to crises, and financial capital's anti-crisis methods further deepen the gap in social division. Rising prices, higher cost of living, and intensified social polarization between rich and poor, social security policies have been destroyed. Poverty, unemployment, and debt slavery have resulted in social stratification and a rebellious working class army, thus contributing to social revolution, and socialism prepares subjective class conditions. Finance capital transfers the burden of accumulation to public power, and public power becomes the debt slave of finance capital. Financial capital pays for the accumulation crisis of financial capital by cutting interest rates, cutting taxes, issuing currency, and cutting social welfare, which makes the people deprived again. The Great Depression hit, and there were unemployed people everywhere. In the process of being deprived of financial capital, the working class lost the protection of public power. The productive class is in deep anxiety, people are no longer silent and rise up to resist. Class politics has become active again, and contradictions, conflicts, and divisions between classes have been directly exposed. Since 2010, large-scale demonstrations have taken place in the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Germany, and other capitalist countries that were previously considered relatively stable economically and socially. The populization of financial capital empire promotes the combination of subjective and objective conditions of socialism. In the face of a profound crisis, and in the face of an angry populace, right-wing populism has risen from the Western political landscape. Although financial oligarchs do not like right-wing populism, in order to prevent the development of social democratic movements, financial oligarchs also show a tendency to combine with right-wing populism. The empires of finance capital are themselves becoming populist. The populist form of the financial capital empire is the form of the financial capital empire's self-reflection, the manifestation of the financial capital empire's anti-historical trend, and the form of the financial capital empire's impending decline. Under the trend of the populization of the financial capital empire, the legitimacy of neoliberalism is in crisis, the reformist road of the middle class is increasingly constricted, the popular movement breaks away from populism and combines with democracy, and the democratic movement is increasingly seeking to align with Marxism. Combine again. The populization of finance capital's empire catalyzed the revival of the socialist movement. First, the populization of the financial capital empire. The social producer class has fallen into unemployment, poverty, and debt slavery under the deprivation of financial capital. Not only has it lost the protection of public power, but it has also suffered new deprivation from the tyrant rule of financial capital. Social contradictions have become more acute, and the people have fallen into deep anxiety. Among people are angry, and right-wing populism has developed on the soil of popular anger. Right-wing populism intuitively and directly blames other groups for its plight. Some politicians will take advantage of the weakness of spontaneous popular movements. For example, Trump is keenly aware of the value of populism to political speculation and uses it to achieve his own goals. Part of the financial capital group will also split out to support populist movements. Faced with the prominence and rise of class contradictions, some forces in financial capital consciously use right-wing populism and combine it with right-wing populism. Although the financial capital in the United States does not like Trump, they found that Trump can at least make public opinion no longer point to Wall Street. Scapegoat country. In this way, finance capital is combined with right-wing populism. In the case of sharp internal class conflicts caused by the accumulation of financial capital, in order to divert the attention of class contradictions and the ruled class, and to divert the attention of the people at the bottom, right-wing populism will definitely rise, and financial capital will definitely transform with the sharpness of contradictions and support right-wing populism. The essence of right-wing populism is actually the misleading, bewitching and utilization of the democratic movement by big financial capital. Right-wing populism blames other countries and races for the crisis. The characteristic of right-wing populism is that it does not touch the interests of the big financial oligarchy, and raises the secondary contradiction to the main contradiction in order to attract people's attention and divert people's attention from the main contradiction. Using very cruel and extreme means to create all kinds of conspiracy theories to attack minorities. Right-wing populism sometimes criticizes certain groups, certain aspects, and certain individuals of financial capital, but it does not criticize the essence and core interests of financial capital. This kind of superficial criticism of right-wing populism is to appease and confuse the people at the bottom. These criticisms allow them to pretend to be the voices of the people, and thus are extremely demagogic. Second, the crisis of legitimacy of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is conservative in nature, and it emphasizes republicanism, tolerance, and primitive contracts. Liberalism hopes that everyone will stick to their original rationality and oppose radicalization. In order to restrain the people's democratic consciousness, liberalism constantly emphasizes personal legal rights, traditions, and even religious ties. Liberalism regards people as abstract rational individuals apart from production relations. In modern life, people have dual identities. From the perspective of legal rights, everyone is equal. From the perspective of the personification of production relations, people are different. But liberalism removes the content and puts the relations of production are removed, and people and the relationship between people are only viewed from the perspective of legal rights, which forms the ideology of liberalism. Liberalism emphasizes that everyone is the same, but once it goes deep into the production relationship, everyone is different. Financial capital is different from ordinary small and medium capital. Blue-collar workers and white-collar workers of small and medium-sized capital are different. Employed workers are different from unemployed workers, but liberalism does not look at these differences based on production relations at all, and only emphasizes that everyone is consistent in the abstract. Liberalism regards the contractual relationship compatible with capitalist production relations as the use and expression of rational freedom. The family is a contract, the company is a contract, the bank is a contract, and the country is a contract. It is legal only if it complies with the contract. From a formal point of view, a contract is manifested as the mutual agreement between free wills, as the independent choice and decision-making of both parties to the contract, and as the use of human rights. The contract embodies human rights, because everyone has the right to express their will, everyone has the right to choose and not to choose. The contractual culture of liberalism is the ideology of the financial capital empire. The interests of financial capital have a formal characteristic, that is, these interests can be realized through contractual relationships, and do not need the power based on sticks like the serf owners in the Middle Ages. The more developed the financial capital is, the more mature and fully it uses the means of socialized mass production, the more it can use the contract relationship to realize its own will and interests leisurely. Financial capital is not afraid of contracts and freedom of contract, which is just suitable for the rule of capital. It is precisely under the contractual relationship that capital monopolizes the means of production and dominates the labor market, product market, capital market, real estate market, and national bond market. It is also under the contractual relationship that capital dominates public power. Capital is not afraid of formalities. Contracts between independent sovereign states are not afraid of international law. As long as financial capital is allowed to invest and acquire strategic resources and banks, Financial capital is not afraid of formally independent sovereign states. The contract is the condition of financial capital activities, and the culture of contract theory is the ideology of the financial empire. Emphasize the right to choose, the right of personality, and human rights in the contract. Emphasizing the rights shared by everyone in the contract will gain a lot of consensus and general recognition, so the interests of financial capital will not be touched. Liberalism uses abstract human rights, legal rights, and freedom of contract to cover production relations, and civic politics to cover class politics. Liberalism disintegrates socialism and eliminates public ownership and collectivist values. Liberalism has no concept of class, advocates the abstract equality of all, and uses the abstract concept of economic man to cover up the opposition in production relations. Liberalism believes that every rational person has the ability to legislate for his own free will from reason, and everyone has a set of social conventions and social contracts that he guides himself to abide by, but populism does not follow these. Right-wing populism is to re-emphasize identity politics through the confrontation between ethnic groups, especially the opposition between the people at the bottom, or the opposition between nations and civilizations. Third, the path of middle-class reformism is unsustainable. Under the trend of the populism of the financial capital empire, not only the core principle of liberalism, that is, the legal equality of abstract people, has been challenged by populism, but the utilitarian premise implied by liberalism has also been denied. The implicit promise of liberalism is, the freedom of legal rights can guarantee the realization of the interests of the people, and guarantee a prosperous society with the middle class as the mainstream. Liberalism pins the stability of the Western world society on the continuous growth of the middle class, that is, the middle income class. Liberalism has a supporting argument of utilitarianism, that is, under the freedom of form, personal interests and social interests can be realized to the maximum extent. Liberalism believes that since everyone can freely choose their own occupations, they must also be able to use their talents. The relatively affluent middle class is the soil on which liberalism can spread. The middle class tries to identify themselves as individuals with self-awareness and free personality. They have their own judgments, their own endowments, and the ability to choose and take responsibility for their own life will. The capitalism that the middle class can accept is the capitalism that can guarantee employment, the capitalism with open opportunities and room for upward mobility. The middle class is not against capitalism, it just wants to improve certain aspects of capitalism. The middle class hopes to weaken the deprivation of financial capital accumulation through secondary distribution and the welfare system, hopes to weaken the domination of public power by the state within financial capital by partially strengthening the public functions of the state, and hopes to restrict the monopoly and speculation of financial capital through legislation. With the development of deprivation and parasitic accumulation of financial capital, and the widespread spread of poverty, unemployment, and debt, the middle class is increasingly demanding to improve the status quo, and the conditions for achieving improvement are becoming more and more stringent. The middle class wants the state to restrain financial capital, but financial capital transfers the crisis to the state, nationalizes junk bonds, and bails out financial institutions with quantitative easing and increased national debt. The middle class hopes that the state can increase social assistance and welfare, but the state is becoming poorer and weaker under the domination of financial capital. Fourth, the shift of popular movements from populism to democracy. Right-wing populism directs popular anger toward other ethnic groups, blurring and downplaying class politics with identity politics. The right-wing populist turn of the financial capital empire not only fails to solve the crisis, but instead makes the crisis develop to a new height and deepens the crisis day by day. For right-wing populism to master the popular movement, it needs to transform itself to a more extreme direction, and it needs right-wing populism to fulfill its promise to confuse the people at the expense of the interests of other ethnic groups and nations. Historically, right-wing populism has been demagogic by transforming into fascism, by strengthening racism, colonialism, war fanaticism, and trying not to touch the interests of financial capital. In the post-colonial era, finance capital, once again advocating racism, colonialism, and war fanaticism, will already be more restrained. Right-wing populists have launched anti-immigration, trade wars, technology wars, and financial wars, advocating a new Cold War. However, these new Cold Wars launched by the right-wing populist forces of financial capital have two sides and are self-destructive. During the Trump administration, the United States did not realize the demagogic promises such as the return of manufacturing, the improvement of the status of the working class, and the greatness of America again. The country's debt burden has weakened the country's social assistance and welfare functions. Although there are still many people who support Trump, more people have separated from right-wing populism and turned to support social democrats such as Sanders. In the 2020 general election in the United States, the center-left alliance has achieved a good performance. Especially in Georgia, especially at the local level, left candidates like Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, Our Revolution, Independent Socialists, Workers' Family Party, etc., won the ballots. The Our Revolution candidate won 76% of the vote. This shocked the ruling class. The People's Movement laid the groundwork for formulating and implementing programs to improve the lives of the working class. Fifth, the recombination of Marxism and the democratic movement. The Communist Party of America believes that capitalism cannot solve the fundamental problems of society. On April 9, 2021, the Communist Party of the United States published an article on its official website stating that it's time to launch its own candidate. The article analyzes the current election situation in the United States, analyzes the importance of selecting and training candidates within the party, and calls for preparations for selecting candidates. The Communist Party of America proposes to use the election of Communist Party candidates as part of the 2021 party building discussions, as part of the national, regional and club discussions. The CCP believes that the CCP cannot become a real political party without selecting candidates. The importance of candidates coming out of community struggles should always be emphasized. There should be a study of where 2022 and 2023 can be major places elections, and focus nationally on one or two candidates, commit all efforts to victory, and dedicate resources to campaigns. There should be discussions on voter suppression, including voter intimidation, and the programs to democratize electoral law. Alliances should be formed with other left-wing organizations and parties to focus on alternatives and focus on building a few campaigns as the focus of national campaigns. Alliances with other parties should not give up independence. The party's class line should be abandoned. The American Communist Party believes that the Democratic Party is a bourgeois party and cannot be reformed. In addition to such signs of recovery in the American Communist Party, the British Communist Party has also performed well, and the realliance of the British Communist Party and the Labour Party has also injected new hope into British politics. In addition to the core countries of financial capital empires such as Britain and the United States, the activity of Marxism in other parts of the world has also become a trend. Of course, socialist movements in the heartlands of finance capitals empires were especially difficult. The political parties of the working class must first obtain a clear theoretical awareness, program goals, and organizational foundation. Western socialist movements also need to continue to develop on the basis of postmodernism, democratic socialism, ecological socialism, and market socialism in order to achieve only with a clearer theoretical awareness, program goals and organizational foundation can we truly move towards survival. The recovery of the Western socialist movement is part of the recovery of world socialism, and a series of unique difficulties it faces will be gradually resolved in the further decline of the U.S. financial capital empire and the overall development of the world socialist movement. Summary. The accumulation of financial capital prepared objective and subjective conditions for socialism. The rule of the financial capital empire tried to prevent the combination of the subjective and objective conditions of socialism, but it made the necessity and inevitability of this combination more obvious because it caused a deeper crisis. On the one hand, the accumulation of financial capital promoted the technological revolution, the socialization of labor, the union of the producer class, the separation of management functions from ownership, and the concentration of economic planning functions, etc., which prepared objective conditions for socialism in large-scale production. On the one hand, the accumulation of financial capital has led to increased manufacturing costs, shrinking social reproduction, poverty, unemployment, and heavy debt slavery among the working class. The dissatisfaction and resistance of the people have become increasingly fierce, which has prepared subjective conditions for promoting the socialist movement. Condition. The empire of financial capital weakens the sovereignty of the people, deprives public power, usurps public power, divides the people, and tries to prevent the combination of subjective and objective conditions of socialism. The domination of the financial capital empire sheltered and strengthened the parasitic accumulation of financial capital, exacerbating the plight of the working class. In the face of popular anger, right-wing populism has risen, and the financial capital empire has combined with right-wing populism, trying to cover up the class politics caused by the accumulation of financial capital with racist identity politics. The populization of the financial capital empire is a manifestation of the financial capital empire going against the historical trend, and it is a form of the financial capital empire's self-reflection. Under the trend of the populization of the financial capital empire, the legitimacy of neoliberalism is in crisis, the road of reformism of the middle class is increasingly constricted, the popular movement breaks away from populism and combines with democracy, and the democratic movement is increasingly seeking to integrate with Marxism reunion. The transformation of liberalism to right-wing populism and the transformation of right-wing populism to socialism under the domination of the financial capital empire are inevitable processes. This article is a phased achievement of the National Social Science Fund project Research on the Value of the Socialist System with Chinese Characteristics in the New Era and the National Social Science Fund Major Project Research on Political Economy Theory Innovation and Historical Experience of China's Development Path since the Reform and Opening Up. Project. The serial numbers are 18 BKS 087, 20 and ZD 052. Note. 1. Selected Works of Lenin, Volume 2, Beijing, People's Publishing House, 2012, p. 654. 2. Selected Works of Marx and Engels, Volume 2, Beijing, People's Publishing House, 2012, p. 572. 3. Volume 3 of Selected Works of Fourier, translated by Wang Yaosan et al., Beijing, Commercial Press, 1982, p. 102. 4. Volume 1 of Selected Works of Owen, translated by K. Xiangfen and others, Beijing, Commercial Press, 1979, p. 310. The Revival of the Socialist Movement under the Populist Trend. Of the Western Financial Capital Empire. Song Chaolong. Abstract. Financial capital is the real factor that dominates the production relations of the Western bourgeoisie. The accumulation of financial capital not only prepares the potential objective conditions for socialism, but also creates the subjective class conditions for socialism to overthrow financial capitalism. The rule of the financial capital empire tried to prevent the combination of subjective and objective conditions of socialism, but the inevitability of this combination was stronger because it caused a deeper crisis. Under the rule of the financial capital empire, the parasitic accumulation of financial capital has been strengthened day by day, the social contradictions have constantly worsened, and the right-wing populism has risen. Under the impact of right-wing populism, neoliberalism has been losing legitimacy. The reformist road of the middle class has continued to narrow, the mass movement is separated from populism and combined with democracy, and the democratic movement is increasingly seeking to be combined with Marxism again. Under the control of the financial capital empire, the transformation from liberalism to right-wing populism and from right-wing populism to socialism are inevitable. Keyword,